Smiles and family photos rarely show the tears shed when no one is looking. In the old photo album resting on my bookshelf, there's one picture that always makes people sigh and say, "What a beautiful family." And in the photo I'm smiling. My brother Thomas is smiling. My mother is holding us both with a proud grin. And my father, he's standing tall in his county uniform, hand placed gently on my shoulder like a father who protects, who provides. It looks perfect. But if you look closer, closer than most people ever bother to look, you might notice the way my shoulders tense, or the way my eyes don't meet the camera. Because smiles, my dears, smiles can lie. Hello, my loves. My name is Margaret. Grandma Margaret if you prefer. I'm 68 years old, speaking to you today from my little porch in Asheville, North Carolina. The sun is setting behind the Blue Ridge Mountains, and the soft chirp of crickets keeps me company, along with the memories I've held inside for far too long. I've spent decades telling pieces of this story to therapists, to trusted friends, to God during long sleepless nights. But today I'm telling it to you, whoever you are, wherever you are, because maybe, just maybe, you've lived through something that makes this story feel a little like yours. Before I begin, I want to say thank you for being here. If anything you hear touches your heart, I'd be grateful if you'd leave a like, subscribe to Grandparents' Tales, and let me know in the comments which part of the country you're watching from. I may be just a grandmother with a laptop and a story, but knowing you're out there makes these memories feel lighter somehow. I was born in 1957 in a small lakeside town in rural Georgia, the kind with a single grocery store, a single school, and more gossip than traffic lights. Our house was a modest red brick home, just a stone's throw from the water, built by my father with his own two hands. It had a white porch swing, a chimney that never worked quite right, and a backyard filled with fireflies come summer. To anyone looking in from the outside, we were the American dream. My father, Anthony, worked for the county. My mother, Josephine, was a beloved elementary school teacher. My little brother Thomas and I were clean, well-fed, polite children who sang in church and never missed school. People would nod at us in church and say things like, "That's the kind of family you hope your kids marry into one day." And I, little Margaret, believed them. Because children don't know what they're missing until something goes wrong. Until the cracks start to show in the walls they were told were safe. From the earliest years there was something uneasy in our home. Not loud, not explosive, at least not yet. But there was silence. Heavy weighted silence. My father was a man of few words. When he smiled in town, people respected him. When he frowned at home, we all held our breath. My mother, gentle, tired, seemed always caught between pride in me and the fear of waking something dark in him. She loved me, I know she did, but that love often came with whispered warnings. "Don't show off too much, honey. Let your brother win just this once. Your father's not in a good mood today. Try not to draw attention." And my brother Thomas, oh Thomas, if I had a nickel for every time someone said, "He's just jealous, he'll grow out of it," I'd have bought myself a ticket out of that town long before life forced me to leave. But he didn't grow out of it. He grew into it. Into resentment. Into sharp words said in the dark. Into little acts of cruelty that no one ever saw but me. When I got good grades, he sulked. When I got praised, he snapped. He once whispered into my ear at age 10, "One day they'll see who you really are." I didn't know what he meant then, but I would come to learn. I would come to understand more about hatred, about silence, and about survival than any child should. But I'm not here just to talk about pain. I'm here to talk about the fight. About how a girl raised in the shadows of a perfect picture learned to step into the light, inch by inch. I'm here to tell you how I took back my story, how I found love, how I learned to forgive without forgetting, and how the scars I carry became bridges I now walk others across. Because this story isn't about being broken. It's about rebuilding. And so, if you'll stay with me, I'll take you back. To the girl in the photo. To the truth behind the smile. To the life behind the frame. It started small. Little things. Little words. A glance that lingered too long. Pout when I got praised. First, I thought it was just the usual sibling rivalry. Why does Margaret always get the good parts in the school play? Why did Mom help her with her cake and not mine? Why does Dad look at her like that when she shows her grades? My brother Thomas was 5 years younger than me. When we were small, I adored him. I used to brush his hair and sneak him candy from the kitchen when Mom wasn't looking. I'd give up my turn on the swing if he begged long enough. He was my baby brother, the one I promised I'd protect. But by the time I turned 10 and he was 5, something had shifted. It wasn't just childish tantrums anymore. There was a look in his eyes I couldn't name then, but now, decades later, I know exactly what it was. Resentment. It settled deep inside him like a seed. And in our house, with its unspoken rules and repressed truths, that seed had plenty of room to grow. I was always a quick learner. Reading came early. Math made sense. I loved books, adored spelling bees, and won the county essay contest 3 years in a row. My teachers praised me. My mother quietly beamed with pride. But my father, he didn't know what to do with a girl who was smarter than the boys. He once said, after reading a glowing teacher's note, "You'll scare men off with all those brains." And then he laughed, but it wasn't funny. So praise came quietly. Accomplishments were folded and tucked away, not framed or celebrated. And still they enraged Thomas. One Christmas, when I was 11 and Thomas was 6, we both received gifts. He got a shiny red fire truck that made sounds and flashed lights. I got a worn second-hand copy of Little Women, with my name written in cursive on the inside cover. He stared at it, then at me, then at our parents. "She gets books," he muttered. "Like she's better than me." I spent years walking on eggshells. My mother would whisper, "Let Thomas win this time, honey. Don't raise your hand too much in class when he's watching." So I started holding back. When we played board games, I'd lose on purpose. When we played piano duets, I'd stumble intentionally. When he wanted something that was mine, I gave it to him without a second thought. First, I told myself it was kindness. But as the years passed, I realized I was shrinking, making myself smaller so that his rage wouldn't grow. And it still grew. By the time I was 12 and he was 7, he had learned how to weaponize words. He'd wait until we were alone. "Mom and Dad love you more. You think you're better than me. One day I'll be the favorite." Once, he found a journal I'd been writing in, my little refuge, and tore out the pages saying, "This is trash. You don't get to be special." Another time, after I won a county art contest, he threw red paint all over my entry and said it fell. There were no bruises to show, but it hurt just the same. My parents saw bits and pieces, but they never pieced it together. To them, it was just Thomas being Thomas. He's a boy. He'll grow out of it. He's sensitive. He looks up to you. But I knew better. Children can sense when something is wrong, and I had a gut feeling that my brother's resentment wasn't going to fade. It was going to ferment. Still, I hoped. I hoped that maybe if I loved him enough, gave enough, bent far enough, he'd love me back. But envy doesn't work like that. Envy doesn't disappear when you shrink. It only demands that you vanish completely. Looking back now, with the clarity age gives you, I see it plainly. My brother didn't hate me because I was praised. He hated me because in our house, where love was rationed and praise felt like currency, every compliment I received felt like a coin stolen from his pocket. And no one, not our parents, not the church, not the neighbors, ever taught us how to love without measuring it. So he learned to measure me, to tally my smiles and his tears. And when the balance tipped too far in my favor, he decided he would tip it back. That seed of resentment would grow into something uglier, something none of us were prepared for. But that's for the next part of this story. All I'll say now is this: if someone in your life keeps asking you to become less so they can feel more, that's not love. That's fear wearing the mask of family. And I've learned that even blood can poison you if you keep drinking it out of loyalty. When I was a little girl, I used to think my father could stop storms. He had that kind of presence, the kind that made neighbors straighten their backs when he walked into a room. He wasn't loud, but when he spoke, people listened. He built our house with his own hands, fixed our broken fence after every summer storm, and once rescued a neighbor's dog from the frozen lake without blinking twice. People admired him, respected him, so I did too. But admiration can be a dangerous thing when it's laced with fear. At home, Daddy Anthony was a different man. The first sign of the shift was subtle, the way his smile disappeared the moment the front door closed. Then came the shoes kicked against the wall, the deep sighs that filled the room like thunderclouds, the long silences that told us more than any shouting ever could. He didn't speak much, but his belt did. And over time, I learned to read the weather in his eyes. There were good days, of course. He'd bring back candy from town, butterscotch wrapped in gold paper. He'd tell us stories about his time fixing roads for the county or teach Thomas how to sharpen a pocket knife. But those moments were brief and unpredictable, like clear skies before a hurricane, because there were also the bad days, and you could never tell which kind of day it was until it was too late. The first time he hit me, I was 8. Not a spanking, not discipline, a hit. I had spilled a glass of milk on the kitchen table. He stood up so quickly his chair fell backward. His hand came down across my cheek faster than my eyes could blink. My mother said nothing. She just turned her face to the stove and stirred the pot like she didn't hear the slap or my quiet gasp. That was the day I realized silence was safer than truth. He didn't hit often, not then. That's what made it worse. The unpredictability, the not knowing. It taught us to flinch at kindness, to wait for the other shoe to drop. My brother Thomas began copying his tone, his phrases. 7. Thomas started saying things like, "Girls can't be smarter than boys. It's not natural." I knew where he learned that. I'd heard it before. When I brought home a report card full of straight A's, my father didn't smile. He just grunted and said, "You'll scare away a good husband acting like that." My mother, Josephine, was caught in the middle. I could see it in her eyes, the tightrope she walked every day. She'd tell me in whispers, "Don't answer back, honey. Just let him cool off. He's tired." He doesn't mean it. But tired men don't bruise their daughters. And love doesn't mean fear. I began to shrink. Not physically, but spiritually. At school, I stopped raising my hand. I stopped showing my awards. I stopped dreaming aloud. I learned that attention was dangerous, that my light only attracted lightning. So I made myself smaller, quieter, more invisible. But fear is a hungry thing, and shrinking never satisfies it. It only feeds it more room. By the time I was 10, I knew the rules. Don't laugh too loudly. Don't disagree at dinner. Don't be too proud. Don't be too smart. And never contradict Daddy in public. People outside saw a strong, silent man. At home, we saw the storm. There's this moment I remember clearly, burned into my memory like an old photograph. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was wearing a pale blue dress with a bow my mother had tied too tightly. After church, we went to a small potluck gathering. One of the ladies complimented me. "Your daughter is just brilliant, Josephine. So poised. So smart." My mother smiled politely. I saw the twitch in my father's jaw. That night, after dinner, he made me recite Bible verses until I stumbled. When I misquoted one, he stood, removed his belt, and said, "God humbles the proud, Margaret. Don't forget that." I didn't. What's hardest to explain is that I still loved him. That's the trick abuse plays on children. Confuses love with obedience. It confuses fear with loyalty. He was my father, the one who taught me to ride a bike, who carried me on his shoulders at the fair, who told me the story of Samson like it was his own. But he was also the man whose hands I feared, whose words could cut deeper than bruises, whose love I could never quite reach without bleeding. People like to think abuse is obvious, that you'll see black eyes, hear screams through the walls. But more often it's a quiet erosion, a steady stripping of safety, a house filled with smiles that don't reach the eyes and dinners eaten in silence. That was my childhood. I tell you all this not for sympathy, but so you understand the storm I grew up in. Because storms don't just come and go. Sometimes they plant themselves inside you. And I carried mine for years, long after the skies outside cleared. But I also want you to know, storms don't last forever. And someday, the girl who learned to hide from lightning can learn to dance in the rain. Some nights don't begin with thunder. They begin in silence. A silence so thick it presses against your ribs and makes you forget how to breathe. That's the kind of night it was. The last night we were all under the same roof. The night we left. The night our family cracked down the middle like a dry branch underfoot. It started like most evenings in our house. The air was sticky with summer heat. My mother, Josephine, was setting the table. My brother Thomas was watching cartoons, legs swinging off the couch. And I was in my room, pretending to do homework but mostly tracing the same flower pattern in the margins of my notebook. Anything to keep my mind off the dread I felt creeping in. My father hadn't come home yet, and when he was late it usually meant one of two things. Either he'd stop at the bar with the boys from the county, or he was too angry to walk through the front door sober. That night it was both. He stumbled in just past 8 p.m. I heard the door slam first, then the heavy footsteps, then the silence in the kitchen as my mother stopped moving. "Where've you been?" she asked, calm but brittle. He didn't answer. The scrape of a chair, the thud of his keys. And then, "I know where you've been," she said again, louder now. "The whole town is talking, Anthony." I crept to the hallway, hiding just behind the wall. I knew better than to interrupt, but I also couldn't not listen. "Shut your mouth, woman." His voice slurred, venomous. "If you were a real wife, I wouldn't have to go looking for what I don't get at home." And then it happened. A sound I'd never heard before, but one I'll never forget. The sound of a slap, the dull thud of flesh meeting flesh, followed by the soft, heartbreaking gasp of my mother falling to the floor. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just ran. I found Thomas first, still on the couch, his face frozen. I grabbed his hand, pulled him up and said, "We're going to Grandma's. Now." We didn't take anything. Just my mother, with a hand pressed to her cheek, holding back tears. Just the three of us, barefoot and shaken, walking through the Georgia night. We stayed at my mother's house. Grandma Irene was strong and solid like oak. When she saw the bruise blooming on my mother's cheek, she didn't ask questions. She just opened the door, handed her a cup of tea, and pulled out the old blankets from the hallway closet. That night, I slept on the floor beside Thomas. He didn't say a word. Didn't ask why we left. Didn't hold my hand like he used to when he was scared. He just stared at the ceiling, and I could feel his anger growing, though I didn't understand why yet. The next morning, my mother made a decision. "We're leaving," she said over eggs and burnt toast. "Not just for now. For good. We're moving to Atlanta. My sister Constance said she can take us in." My heart skipped. Atlanta? I had never been farther than the next county. But my mother's voice left no room for doubt. "We're not going back to that house." And then came the heartbreak I didn't see coming. Thomas, my baby brother, my shadow, my fiercest critic, stood up and said, "I'm not going. I want to stay with Daddy." First we thought he was joking. My mother laughed nervously. "Don't be silly, son. We're all going." But he crossed his arms, jaw clenched.
"No, I'm staying."
"I'm not leaving him." I looked at him in disbelief. "Thomas, he hit Mom." He didn't flinch. Didn't blink. "You're always trying to ruin everything. You made her leave him." "I'm staying." My father showed up later that morning. Sober. Apologetic. Carrying a box of donuts and promises like confetti. "Let's talk, Josephine. Let's be adults. Let the boy decide." And he did. Thomas walked across the room, stood by our father's side, and said, "I want to stay with Dad. Let Margaret go with you." Felt like being split in two. So we left. 2 suitcases. 2 broken hearts. 1 car ride to the bus station. I looked back only once. Thomas didn't wave. My father didn't speak. Just stood there, one hand on his shoulder, the other holding a cigarette. That was the day our family shattered. Not loudly. Not with screaming or lawyers or courtrooms. Just with a choice. A child's choice. And the kind of quiet goodbye that echoes for the rest of your life. It would take years for me to understand why he stayed. Even longer to accept that not everyone leaves when they should. But that morning on a Greyhound bus bound for Atlanta, I learned one of life's hardest truths. Sometimes survival means choosing to walk away from people you love. Even when it breaks your heart. Even when they call it betrayal. Even when they're too young to understand why you had to go. Atlanta smelled different. I noticed it the moment we stepped off the bus. The air was thick but alive, humming with motion. It was the scent of hot pavement, sweet magnolia, and something else I couldn't quite place. Possibility. After the storm of our departure, that alone was enough to make my mother and me exhale for the first time in what felt like years. Aunt Constance welcomed us like a lighthouse welcomes lost ships. She lived in a narrow yellow house in the Kirkwood neighborhood, with ivy climbing the porch and wind chimes that sang soft songs in the breeze. She was younger than my mother by 6 years, had never married, and taught 3rd grade at a nearby school. She wore bold lipstick, collected teacups, and always seemed to have fresh bread in the kitchen. When she hugged us at the door, she didn't say, "What happened?" She just said, "You're safe now. Let's get you inside." Those first few nights I slept like I hadn't in years. No footsteps down the hallway. No yelling from behind closed doors. No fear of belts or slaps or breaking plates. Just the hum of cicadas outside and my mother's soft breathing in the twin bed beside mine. We were still scared, still shaken, but we were safe. And for a girl like me, that felt like freedom. Within a week, my mother had a job at the elementary school where Aunt Constance worked. She started teaching 3rd grade again, and I was enrolled at the same school, though in a different wing. There were no whispered warnings anymore. No instructions to lose on purpose. No need to hide my good grades or pretend I didn't understand the answer. For the first time, I was allowed to shine. My new teacher, Miss Elisa, was the kind who made you feel like the world was waiting just for you. "You've got something special in you, Margaret," she said one day, kneeling beside my desk after I read my essay aloud. "A sharp mind, a kind heart, a future." That sentence echoed in my chest for days. No one had ever said anything like that to me before. Not like they truly believed it. I started writing again. Poems, journal entries, short stories about brave girls who ran toward storms and came out the other side stronger. I was beginning to believe I could be one of them. Aunt Constance made our home feel whole again. She taught me how to bake cornbread from scratch, how to iron without burning the fabric, how to write a proper thank you note. On Saturday mornings, we'd sit on the porch with mugs of sweet tea, and she'd tell me about books and cities and dreams she still hadn't chased. Sometimes, when my mother thought I wasn't listening, I'd catch her whispering, "God bless you, Connie. I don't know what I would have done without you." And Connie would simply smile and say, "That's what sisters are for." But even peace has its cracks. First, it was little things. A look on my mother's face when the phone rang. The way she froze anytime someone knocked at the door unexpectedly. The nightmares that returned some nights, mine and hers, dragging us back to the house we'd escaped. But the biggest crack of all came in a plain envelope. It was a letter. From Grandma Dolores. Inside were a few lines written in her firm, looping script. "Anthony's not well. He's drinking more. Thomas is still with him. He's angry all the time. I thought you should know." I watched my mother read it at the kitchen table. She didn't cry. Didn't crumble. She just folded it back up, placed it under the sugar jar, and stared out the window for a long time. That was the beginning of the ache that never quite left. Because no matter how far you run, family doesn't always stay behind. Some wounds echo through time and space. And Thomas, my brother, the boy I once held through thunderstorms, was still there. Still with the man who had torn our lives apart. Still growing up in a house where anger was currency and silence was survival. I tried to write him letters. Careful, gentle ones. "E. Thomas. I hope school is going okay. I'm in Atlanta now. We have a goat in the backyard named Penny." He never wrote back. 3 years passed like that. In soft routines. New friendships. The quiet joy of being unseen by danger. By the time I turned 15, I had grown into a young woman. Taller. Quieter. More cautious than most girls my age, but also, finally, curious. I had friends at school who talked about boys and dances and lipstick. I didn't say much, but I listened. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the mirror and wonder, who am I becoming? Who am I allowed to be now? Then, one Sunday in July, everything changed again. A call came from Grandma Dolores. My father, she said, was very sick, bedridden. His liver was failing. He didn't have much time. "We need to see him," my mother said softly. "Despite everything, he's still your father." My heart twisted. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to see the man who made our home a battlefield. But I was 15. I was still a daughter. Still someone trying to be good. So we packed our bags, boarded a bus, and returned to the place where everything had once broken. I thought I was ready, but nothing could have prepared me for what waited there. For the boy I'd left behind, and the shadows he'd been living in. The bus ride back to my hometown felt like a descent, down winding roads into familiar shadows I thought I'd outgrown. I was 15, a girl on the brink of womanhood. I had just begun to believe in healing, in quiet mornings, in possibility. But this trip, it wasn't about hope. It was about obligation. My father was dying. That was what the letter said. Liver failure from years of drinking. He was weak, confined to a sofa in my grandmother's home, barely able to walk. "He's still your father," my mother said, her voice tight but resolute. And I nodded because I didn't know how to say no to a woman who had sacrificed so much. I told myself it would be just a visit, a weekend. Then we'd return to Atlanta, to our safety, to our still new life. I didn't know I was walking back into a nightmare. The town hadn't changed much. Same dry roads. Same white church steeple rising over peeling rooftops. Same hush of judgment behind closed doors. And Grandma Dolores's house was exactly how I remembered it. Blue shutters, crooked porch, air thick with the scent of dust and memory. My father was lying on the sofa, covered in white sheets. He looked smaller. Not just thinner but diminished. His skin yellowed, eyes sunken, hands trembling slightly as he reached for mine. "You really came," he whispered. I nodded. Words failed me. He smiled. "Still so pretty. Just like your mother used to be." That made my stomach twist. Then Thomas entered the room. 3 years had changed him. He was now 10 taller, stronger, with a new hardness in his eyes that didn't belong to a child. He held a half-eaten mango in one hand and didn't look surprised to see us. Not happy. Not sad. Just assessing. "Hi, Thomas," I said quietly. He stared at me. "You're different." "So are you," I replied. It was true, but not in the way I'd hoped. Later he showed me his room. A small space filled with neatly arranged toy cars. He spoke proudly of how many his dad had given him. "I'm the son who stayed," he said. "I deserve more." The word stung. I tried to bridge the gap. Asked about school, friends, hobbies. But he met every question with cold shrugs or sharp words. Finally he said, "Why did you come back? We were fine without you." That night, while my mother and grandmother cooked in the kitchen, I wandered to the living room and stared at the old family photos on the wall. In one, I was just a baby in my father's arms. In another, Thomas and I sat on the front steps, our hands sticky with popsicle juice, smiles wide and true. Where had that gone? When did innocence twist into envy? Then a hand touched my shoulder. I turned. It was my father. "I wanted a moment alone with you," he said. He didn't look sick in that moment. He looked familiar in a way that chilled me. He stepped closer. Too close. "You've turned into a real woman, haven't you?" His hand dropped lower. His breath reeked of medicine and old whiskey. His voice, soft and sinister, whispered things I refused to repeat. I froze. Time didn't stop, but my body did. Fear returned fast and full. I pushed past him and ran toward the door. It opened before I reached it. Thomas stood there. He looked at me, then at our father, and narrowed his eyes. "What's going on?" he asked. My father answered first. "Your sister was just helping me lie down." His voice was too casual, too smooth. I fled. Locked myself in the bathroom, shaking. My thoughts spiraled. Did that really just happen? Was I overreacting? Was this what he did when we weren't around? The answer came too quickly. Later, Thomas found me again. His face was unreadable. "You don't need to act shocked," he said. "He does that with girls. From the neighborhood. All the time." I froze. He leaned closer. "Sometimes they even come back." There was no regret in his voice.
No horror.
Just observation. Like he was describing a weather pattern. And then the worst part. He smiled. A smile I still see in dreams. "I've learned from him," he whispered. "I can show you what he showed me." His hand reached for me. And just like that, I wasn't his sister. I was a thing to practice on. I pushed him away. Ran. Told my mother everything. First, she didn't believe me. But when she saw my face, saw the way my body trembled, something in her cracked. That same night, we tried to leave. But my father and brother stood in the doorway like shadows made flesh. And that's when my Uncle Augustus arrived. Tall. Silent. Steady. A man of few words, but enough strength to shatter the walls of that house. He didn't ask many questions. He saw what he needed to see. And he made a decision. "You're coming with me. Now." That night we left again. But this time it wasn't just escape. It was survival. I wasn't the same girl who left Atlanta. I was fractured. ashamed, and carrying a darkness that wasn't mine, but had wrapped itself around me like smoke. I didn't know how to begin healing. But for now, I clung to one fragile truth. We had left the wolves behind. Or at least, I hoped we had. Some moments in life don't leave scars on your skin. They go deeper. They mark your memory, your breath, your very sense of who you are. For me, one of those moments happened in the quiet hallway of my grandmother's house, in a town that already knew too many of my tears. It had only been a day since my mother and I arrived to visit my father, who was dying, so we were told. And I did believe he was sick. His skin was gray-yellow, his eyes bloodshot and glassy, and his movements slow and uneven. But what no one warned me about was that sickness doesn't always make a man weak. Not in his heart, not in his eyes. Sometimes it just makes him more dangerous because he knows time is running out. That morning had passed quietly. My mother and grandmother were busy in the kitchen, making soup and cornbread. Thomas was off somewhere. I didn't ask where. And my father, Anthony, was lying on the old couch, half asleep with a cold towel across his forehead. Or so I thought. I wandered into the living room to look at the old photographs on the wall. Faded images of a younger version of him, of my mother, of myself before I understood fear. One photo made me pause. Thomas and I sitting on a picnic blanket, both smiling. I remember that day. We were eating watermelon. He had juice all over his chin and laughed until he hiccuped. That boy seemed like someone I had dreamed. I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around and saw my father. He wasn't using his cane. He didn't look sleepy. He smiled. But it wasn't the smile I remembered from bedtime stories. It wasn't the smile of a father. "You've grown up so much, Margaret," he said, his voice low as if whispering a secret. "So beautiful, just like your mother was." I backed up instinctively, pretending not to understand. But he stepped forward, closing the space. "You've always been my favorite," he added. And then, without warning, his hand touched my face. Slid down. Lower. I froze. Not out of politeness, not out of confusion, but because my body remembered something my brain didn't yet have words for. Danger. I tried to step back again, but his hand moved faster. "You don't have to be afraid," he murmured. "You're a woman now. You understand." I didn't. And I did. And that's what terrified me most. I pushed him harder than I knew I could and ran for the door. But it opened before I reached it. Thomas stood there, holding a soda can, and looked at the scene, me wide-eyed, breathing hard, our father a few feet behind, adjusting his robe like nothing had happened. "What's going on?" he asked. "Your sister was helping me up," my father said calmly. Thomas looked at me. Not suspicious. Just blank. And I ran. I locked myself in the bathroom, hands shaking, knees weak. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to scream. But mostly I wanted to disappear. How do you tell someone what just happened when the man who hurt you is the man who once carried you on his shoulders? How do you explain that something was taken without ever being fully touched? That a moment can make you feel used, broken, unclean, even if nothing happened the way people imagine it? I stayed in that bathroom for what felt like hours. Washed my hands. Washed my face. Tried to wash away something invisible but heavy. And when I stepped out, I wasn't the same girl who had walked in. Later that evening, Thomas found me sitting on the back porch. He didn't say hello. He just sat beside me and said, "You looked scared earlier." I said nothing. Then he added, almost casually, "He does that to other girls, you know, the ones from down the road. Sometimes they come over when grandma's out. He says it's just for fun." My breath caught. He said it like someone commenting on the weather. When I finally found the strength to whisper, "And you never told anyone?" He shrugged. "He's our dad." Then he looked me straight in the eyes and said something I will never forget. "I've learned from him. You'll see." I stood up so fast the chair scraped against the wood. And I ran again, this time not because I was afraid of what had happened, but because of what might still happen. I told my mother everything that night. All of it. I stammered. I cried. I couldn't find all the words. But she saw the truth in my eyes. She didn't ask for proof. Didn't say I misunderstood. Didn't say. It was just a touch. She believed me. And that changed everything. She called my Uncle Augustus the next morning. And by sundown we were gone. For good this time. They say the worst kind of violence is the one that doesn't leave a bruise. That lives in shadows and silence. That makes you question your own memory. But I remember the smell of his breath, the weight of his hand, the way he said I was just like my mother, as if that excused anything. And I remember the moment I stopped being a girl and became someone who would never again feel fully safe in her own skin. That was the first violation, but it wouldn't be the last. Because trauma doesn't just hurt once. It echoes. But I had survived this far. And I wasn't done yet. I used to believe there was a line. Some invisible boundary that blood could never cross. No matter how angry Thomas had been with me growing up, no matter the resentment in his voice, I believed that deep down he was still my little brother. The one who used to cry when he scraped his knee. The one who begged me to sing lullabies during summer thunderstorms. The one who once held my hand so tight, I thought he'd never let go. But that day he let go. Not gently. Not with sorrow. He let go with fire. And in his place something else stepped forward. After my father's violation I was raw and numb on the outside but 1,000 pieces on the inside. I hadn't slept that night. Even with my mother next to me, I felt haunted, like shadows were dancing across the ceiling and whispering that I would never be clean again. The next morning we were packing to leave. My mother had made the decision quickly. We wouldn't stay another day. Not under that roof. Not under his gaze. She moved with a quiet fury, folding clothes, stuffing what little we brought into our worn bags. She didn't speak much, but the tightness in her jaw, the way she kept one eye on every door and hallway said everything. I was folding my cardigan when Thomas appeared in the bedroom doorway. He didn't knock. He never had. But this time his presence felt heavier, like something cold had walked in behind him. I heard Mom called Uncle Augustus, he said. I nodded. She's taking you away again. She's taking us away, I replied gently. You too, Thomas. But he shook his head slowly. I don't want to go. I took a step closer. We can start over. Together. In Atlanta. You'll like it. He cut me off. She said you told her about what Dad did. I hesitated. Yes. He stared at me, silent for a beat. Then, you shouldn't have done that. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't hurt. It was something worse. Flat. Emotionless. Like a boy repeating something he didn't fully understand but had already accepted. He walked closer. You always ruin things, Margaret. You always take everything. I stepped back. No, I didn't. I'm trying to help us. Help you. He stopped just a foot away now. You think you're better than me? He tilted his head. Dad says you think I'm stupid. That you laughed at me when you left. I shook my head, tears springing to my eyes. Thomas, I never said that. I've missed you every single day. He smiled then, but it wasn't the smile of a child. It was twisted, unfamiliar. Then show me, he said. Before I could speak, he reached for me, rough, clumsy hands pulling at my sleeve. His touch was confused, erratic. Not quite understanding boundaries but trying to mimic something he'd seen, or had done to him. No, I gasped, twisting away. Thomas, stop. This isn't okay. He pinned me against the wall, and whispered, I'm not a little boy anymore. I know what I'm doing. I don't remember how I got free. Maybe I pushed him. Maybe he loosened his grip. But I ran again. My lungs burned. My heart felt like it might rip through my chest. And just like before, I ran to my mother. When I told her what Thomas had done, what he had become, she didn't cry. She turned to stone. I remember her kneeling beside me, holding my face in her hands, her eyes red but dry. He's gone, she said softly. I didn't understand. Gone. I whispered. She nodded. Whatever boy you knew, your brother, your Thomas, he's not here anymore. And I think that's when I finally broke. Because with everything that had happened, with all the pain my father had caused, it was this that cut deepest. I had lost my brother. Not to death, but to something worse. To corruption. To a cycle of violence that had rooted itself so deep, he couldn't even see it as wrong. He thought he was claiming something, but really he was becoming the very thing we had run from. When Uncle Augustus arrived later that day and saw the look on my mother's face, the bruises on my soul, I didn't have to explain. He looked at Thomas. then at me, and simply said, "We're leaving. Now." As we walked out that door, bags in hand, hearts shredded, I didn't look back, because I knew if I did, I might see a pair of eyes I no longer recognized. Eyes that used to light up when I brought him candy. Eyes that used to follow me into the lake, begging me to teach him how to swim. Now they were something else. Cold, empty, hungry. Some losses you mourn forever. Not because you want the person back, but because you remember what they were before they changed. That day I didn't just lose a home. I lost my only sibling. And the hardest part? He didn't even notice I was gone. Sometimes the people who save us don't arrive in shining armor. They come in sturdy boots, with tired eyes, and the kind of silence that says, "I've seen worse and I'm still standing." For me, that person was my uncle, Augustus. Growing up, I barely knew him. He was my mother's older brother, 10 years her senior, a career military man stationed in Virginia. In family photos, he always looked serious, impeccably dressed, back straight, arms folded, a man of discipline, not sentiment. I remember overhearing whispers about him at family reunions. He never married. He's seen things no one should see. He raised Josephine after their parents died. To me, as a child, he was a ghost in uniform. But that summer, after the worst days of my life, he became something else entirely. He became my lifeline. The morning after Thomas tried to hurt me, my mother made a decision. She didn't hesitate, didn't cry. She went to the rotary phone in the hallway and dialed a number she had long memorized but hadn't used in years. When the call connected, she simply said, "Gus, it's Josephine. I need you. I need you now." And then she hung up. No explanation. No tears. Just a mother summoning the only person she trusted enough to fix what she couldn't. He arrived 12 hours later. The front door opened with a weighty thud, and there he was. 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, gray-streaked hair cropped short, wearing his Marine Corps uniform, the medals on his chest glinting slightly in the dusty afternoon light. He didn't knock, didn't wait to be greeted. He walked straight into the house, like a man who didn't ask permission to protect the ones he loved. My father was in the kitchen, pretending to be sick again. Thomas sat stiffly in the living room, avoiding eye contact. I stood by the staircase, my heart pounding like it was about to split my ribs open. My uncle took one look at me, and I swear he knew. Not just that something bad had happened, but what had happened, who had done it, why I couldn't speak it aloud. He turned to my mother. "Josephine." She didn't answer with words, just a nod, and her eyes filling with tears she'd held in far too long. Then he looked at me. "Margaret," he said, "tell me." No one had ever asked me like that before. Not with authority, not with belief already built into their tone, not with the quiet rage of someone ready to move mountains, if I gave him the reason. So I did. I told him everything. About my father. About Thomas. About what they said. What they tried to do. What I felt, what I feared, what I couldn't make sense of. My voice cracked halfway through. My hands shook. I stared at the floor because I couldn't bear to see disgust on another man's face. But when I finally looked up, he wasn't looking at me with disgust. He was looking at them. He walked to my father, who was now pale and trying to act fragile. "You disgusting monster," my uncle whispered. Then, without raising his voice, without a dramatic warning, he punched him. Hard. Right across the jaw. My father fell like a tree. Thomas screamed and rushed forward. But my uncle held him off with one single firm arm. No violence. Just resistance. "Stay down, boy," he warned. And Thomas did. Not because he was scared, but because he didn't understand what it meant to face a real man. A man who didn't prey on the weak. Who didn't hide behind power or silence. A man who believed women. My mother grabbed our bags. I grabbed my shoes and my notebook, my only real possession. My uncle guided us to the car. He didn't speak until we were several miles down the highway. Then he said, "You won't ever go back there. That's not home anymore." He took us to Norfolk. Let us stay in his small 2-bedroom apartment. He gave up his own bed and slept on the couch. Cooked us rice and beans. Taught me how to lock the door twice at night. Not once did he ask me why I didn't fight harder. Not once did he question my story. Not once did he say, "Are you sure it wasn't just confusion?" He just said, "You're safe now. And I'm proud of you." Uncle Augustus didn't talk much. But when he did, every word landed like a brick in a foundation I didn't even know I was building. He reminded me that there are good men. Men who protect. Men who serve. Men who step forward, not back when the darkness creeps in. He stayed in our lives long after that. Helped my mother get a teaching job. Took me to therapy when I finally admitted I needed help. Sent postcards from every deployment. And on each postcard he wrote the same thing. "Remember, you are never alone." That's what it means to be believed. To be seen not as broken but as brave. Not as a burden but as someone worth protecting. Uncle Augustus didn't just pull me out of a burning house. He rebuilt the foundation I'd been standing on. And for that I owe him everything. Healing, they say, isn't a straight road. But what no one told me is that sometimes before it gets better, it gets much, much worse. For a while after Uncle Augustus brought us to Norfolk, I thought I could breathe again. New city, new school, new walls that didn't echo with my father's footsteps or my brother's shadow. But the truth is, trauma doesn't stay in the house you left. It follows you, quietly, like a ghost with soft shoes. At 16 I started my new life. A new high school. New classmates who didn't know what had been done or almost done to me. They saw a quiet girl who liked books and wore her hair neat. But inside I was a storm. I'd flinch when someone closed a locker too loudly. I avoided hugs like they were fire. I couldn't sit near boys in class. My chest would tighten. My breath would shorten. Some days I couldn't eat. Other days I ate everything I could just to feel something. But the hardest part? The shame. Even though I was the one who ran. The one who said no. The one who told the truth. I still carried shame like it was stitched into my skin. I felt broken. Used. Spoiled. Even though I wasn't to blame, I knew that. I still believed somewhere deep down that I was damaged beyond repair. So I tried to hide it. I smiled in the hallways. Got good grades. Said yes ma'am and no sir. And then I started sneaking little sips of wine from the bottle under the sink. Just to help me sleep. My mother never noticed at first. She was working long hours. Teaching during the day and tutoring at night, trying to keep us afloat. And Uncle Augustus had been transferred back to base in Virginia after a few months. I was alone most evenings. And that's when the whispers returned. The ones that said, "You're not safe. You'll never be safe. It's going to happen again. And this time no one will believe you." I didn't want to think. I didn't want to feel. So I drank. It started slowly. A stolen sip here. A poured inch there. Wine. Then whiskey. Then whatever I could find. First it felt like medicine. It silenced the nightmares. Numbed the memories. Gave me something to hold on to when everything else slipped through my fingers. But soon it became something else. A need. Craving. By the time I was 18 I was drinking every day. Mornings. Afternoons. Before school. After work. When I laughed. When I cried. When I didn't feel anything at all. And it worked for a while. The pain got quieter. The flashbacks dimmed. The tears came less often. But so did everything else. I stopped caring about school. Missed classes. Lied to my mother about where I was going. I lost my part-time job at the florist shop after showing up late and smelling like cheap rum. I pushed away the few friends I had. They didn't understand the shadows I lived with. Didn't understand why I couldn't just move on. Even my mother started to notice. "You're not well, Margaret," she said one night, her voice cracking. I shrugged. "I'm fine." But I wasn't. And she knew it. One night I came home drunk. It was raining. I had slipped in the mud, ruined my only nice pair of shoes. My mother opened the door and just stared at me, muddy, soaked, reeking of gin. She didn't yell. She just said softly, "My baby. What happened to my baby?" And I broke. I collapsed on the floor sobbing. All the hurt I'd buried beneath alcohol, beneath silence, came rushing out like floodwater through a cracked dam. "I don't want to remember," I whispered. "I don't want to feel it anymore." She sat beside me, pulled me into her lap like I was 5 again, and whispered back, "Then let me carry some of it for you. But trauma doesn't get lighter just because you share it. An addiction doesn't vanish with hugs. The next morning I drank again. And again. Because knowing someone loves you, that doesn't erase what's inside. I hit rock bottom at 19. I woke up on the bathroom floor of a gas station. Don't remember how I got there.
No shoes. No wallet.
No sense of time. Just a bottle in my hand and vomit in my hair. I crawled out to the road and sat on the curb watching cars pass, too dazed to cry, too empty to ask for help. That's when a janitor named Mr. Manuel, an old man with kind eyes and strong hands, offered me his coat. "Child," he said gently, "you don't have to keep doing this." And I believed him. Maybe not entirely. Maybe not forever. But for that moment, I believed. That was the first step. One shaky breath. One decision. I don't want to die like this. The road to healing was still long, far longer than I knew. But that day, sitting on the curb in borrowed warmth, I realized something that would carry me through the next chapter of my life. You can't outrun your pain, but you can stop giving it the wheel. They say everyone has a bottom, a line where everything collapses. For some, it's losing a job. For others, it's a hospital bed or a jail cell. For me, it was the roof of an 8-story building in Norfolk, with the wind in my face and silence louder than any scream. By the time I was 20, my life felt like it was held together by threadbare string, barely hanging on and fraying more each day. I had lost another job, this time at a diner. I had lied to my mother so many times, I couldn't tell which version of me she believed anymore. I stopped going to meetings, stopped pretending I was okay, and then I stopped pretending I wanted to live. That morning, I woke up in my clothes on the couch with a half-empty bottle beside me. The sun was already high, my mouth dry, my stomach empty, my soul hollow. I looked at the calendar. It was my birthday, 21, the age where people are supposed to feel free, celebrate, toast to possibilities. Instead, I felt like I had already lived a lifetime too long. My mother had left a note on the kitchen table. Had to go early. Don't forget to eat. Happy birthday, my baby. I love you. I stared at those words until they blurred into nothing. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just climbed. The roof wasn't locked. Just a rusty metal door that creaked open with a push. I stepped into the sunlight. Warm, bright, almost cruel in its indifference. Below me, the city buzzed like it always did. Cars, buses, birds, horns. People going about their lives, laughing, shouting, buying groceries. None of them knew that a girl in an oversized sweater and broken heart was about to disappear. I walked to the edge, shoes scraping the gravel, breath shallow, hands cold. I didn't feel afraid. And that scared me more than anything. Because I'd been afraid for so long. Of men, of memories, of touch, of silence, of being alone. And now nothing. No fear.
No sadness.
Just a dull emptiness, like the final page of a book that ended badly. I looked down. The cars were tiny, people like dots. And I thought, they'll forget me. In a week. Maybe less. The only thing I felt was shame. For being broken. For not being strong. For still carrying wounds everyone thought should have healed. And then just as I took a step closer, I heard a voice behind me. Soft. Old. Worn with years but clear as a church bell. "Miss," it said. "Don't do that." I turned. Mr. Manuel. The janitor from our building. A man I'd passed a dozen times without noticing. Always sweeping the hallway. Whistling low. Ice kind. He was holding a broom in one hand, a bag of groceries in the other. But his eyes were locked on mine, not with anger, not with panic, with understanding. "You don't have to do this," he said.
I'm tired, he whispered.
"I know," he replied. "I can't fix it. No one can fix it all," he said. "But you don't have to carry it alone." I shook my head. "You don't know what I've done, what I've lived." And then he said something I'll never forget. "Child, pain doesn't make you unworthy. It makes you human." That moment cracked something inside me. Just a little. Just enough to step back from the ledge. I sank to the ground, knees shaking, tears falling for the first time in months. He sat with me. Didn't ask questions. Didn't try to rescue me with cliches. Just sat. Like a rock in a storm. Like someone saying, "You're not invisible." Later that afternoon, he took me, personally, to my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting in weeks. introduced me to a woman named Helen, a sponsor who had once been where I was. And for the first time I said it out loud. My name is Margaret, and I don't want to die. That roof wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because rock bottom isn't a dead end. It's the ground you push off from. If someone gives you their hand, and that's what Mr. Manuel gave me. Not salvation, not a magic cure, just a hand, and a place to land. Rock bottom is brutal, but if you're lucky, really lucky, it becomes the soil where something new can grow. That day on that roof in that wind, I didn't find hope. I found the space where hope could be planted, and for now that was enough. Healing doesn't always come in lightning bolts. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the shape of scissors in your hand, the soft weight of hair falling to the floor, or the smile of a woman seeing herself clearly for the first time in years. That's how healing found me. Not through grand speeches or miracles, but through shampoo, through conversation, through second chances offered in the reflection of a mirror. After that morning on the roof, after Mr. Manuel brought me down, both literally and figuratively, something inside me changed. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't suddenly love life or wake up inspired, but the thought of maybe wanting to live someday, that took root. I returned to AA meetings, every day for a while, because I didn't trust myself to make it without them. There I met Mary Helen, my sponsor, my lifeline, my unexpected anchor. She was in her late 50s with wiry gray hair always pulled back, and a laugh that filled the room. She'd been sober 15 years and swore like a sailor, but her eyes were soft and steady. "You don't need to be perfect, honey," she said the first time we talked. "You just need to show up. Every single day." Showing up. That became my mantra. So I showed up to meetings. Showed up to take care of Mom, who was growing frail but still sharp. And eventually, I showed up to a job interview at a small beauty salon downtown. Miss Celia's beauty corner wasn't much. 2 chairs, 1 old dryer, and a wall full of faded magazine cutouts from the 70s. But it smelled like lavender and hairspray and comfort. "I'll be honest," Miss Celia said, narrowing her eyes at me. "I don't normally take chances on girls with gaps in their resume and eyes that say they've been through war." I blinked. "But I'm old, and my knees ache, and I need help. You know how to hold scissors." I nodded. "Good," she said. "We'll teach you the rest." That's how it started. Part-time job, washing hair, sweeping floors, learning from the older women who had worked in that place longer than I'd been alive. I was quiet at first, afraid to speak, afraid to make a mistake, afraid they'd see right through me, that they'd know about the drinks, the roof, the ghosts. But hair has a funny way of opening people up. I'd wash a woman's hair and she'd tell me about her husband's layoff, trim a child's bangs and learn about her mother's cancer, dye a widow's roots and hear how she still talked to her late husband while folding laundry. Bit by bit, I started speaking too. Just little things. Compliment here. A story there. And the salon became more than work. It became safe. One afternoon, I was shampooing a woman named Gloria. She was in her late 30s, quiet, wearing oversized sunglasses even inside. As I massaged her scalp, she flinched. "Sorry," she mumbled. "Bruise." I didn't ask. Didn't need to. I just softened my touch, lowered the water temperature, and whispered, "You're safe here." She cried silently for the rest of the wash. After that, she became a regular. It was then I realized, healing didn't have to be huge. It didn't have to mean forgiveness or forgetting. Sometimes, healing was holding space for someone else. And in doing so, healing yourself too. Miss Celia saw the change in me. "You've got hands, girl," she said one Friday, watching me do a soft layer cut for an older woman. "You don't just style hair. You give people back their dignity." Her words stuck, because for so long I hadn't had any of my own. And now maybe I was growing some back. One haircut at a time. I saved up and took a night course in cosmetology. Learned the theory, the color wheels, the skin tones. Graduated with a certificate that felt more valuable than any diploma. Because it didn't just mean I could cut hair. It meant I was finally building something. A future. At 24, I started seeing myself in the mirror again. Not the broken girl. Not the drunk. Not the daughter of a monster or the sister of a boy lost too early to hate. Just Margaret. hairdresser, survivor, woman. The road ahead was still long. The nightmares hadn't stopped. There were days I shook with anxiety, nights I cried without knowing why. But now I had a chair to stand behind, scissors in my hand, stories to listen to, and a mirror that didn't lie but didn't shame me either. That year, Miss Celia gave me a key to the salon. "I trust you," she said. "You've earned it." It wasn't just a key to the building. It was a key to life, to second chances, to dignity, to purpose. And I held it tight. Healing didn't come all at once, but slowly, with every head I touched, with every woman I comforted, with every curl I helped someone love. I learned to touch my own wounds too, gently, patiently, with grace. By the time I was 25, I had become good at many things. I could layer a bob haircut with my eyes half closed. I could spot a woman hiding a bruise under foundation. I could smile politely even when my heart was aching. But there was one thing I still couldn't do. Trust. Not with men. Not with romance. Not with anything that required me to be soft and open and seen. The scars I carried weren't visible, but they shaped everything. They told me I was too broken to be loved. Too much baggage. Too many ghosts. Too many nights spent trying to outrun memories I could never fully leave behind. So I worked. I stayed sober. I kept my head down. And love? Love was a thing I styled in other women's hair for their weddings. Not something meant for girls like me. Then came Joseph. He didn't walk in like a movie hero. He walked in holding a toolbox, looking uncomfortable under the bright salon lights. The faucet in the back's been leaking, Miss Celia had grumbled that morning. Called a guy. You'll like him. Doesn't talk much. And she was right. Joseph Sanders didn't talk much. He was tall, broad-shouldered, maybe mid-40s, with thinning brown hair and work-worn hands. A former barber, Miss Celia said. Widowed. Father of 2 grown sons. He nodded at me when he entered. Barely made eye contact. But when he fixed the leak, he did it gently. Quietly. He cleaned up after himself and left the room exactly how he found it. Except better. Thank you, I said as he packed up his tools. He looked up at me and replied simply, You're welcome, Mississippi. Then he left.
No flirting. No lingering.
Just respect. He returned 2 weeks later. Not to fix anything this time, but for a haircut. Been a while, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Figured I should look decent. My son's getting married next month. He sat in my chair. And I was terrified. Not of him exactly, but of the closeness. Of having a man that near. Of touching his hair, his shoulders. But something about Joseph put me at ease. He didn't fidget. Didn't push conversation. Just let the silence be. So I cut his hair. Carefully. Slowly. Trying to match the quiet kindness in his posture. When he stood up, he looked in the mirror and smiled a little. Thank you, Margaret, he said. You made me look like someone who belongs at a wedding. He came back the next month. And the next. Sometimes for a trim. Sometimes just to drop off bread from the bakery next door. He never stayed long. Never asked for more than I was ready to give. But I noticed things. How he always held the door for older women. How he always wore clean boots, no matter how dusty the streets were. How he once paid for a stranger's bus fare outside, thinking no one saw. He didn't know that kindness like his was the rarest kind. The kind that asked for nothing. We started walking after work. Short ones. Few blocks. Sometimes just to the park bench across the street. I told him about my love for flowers. He told me he once wanted to be a woodworker. He never pressed about my past. But one day I told him anyway. About the house in Georgia. About my brother. My father. The pain. The silence. The roof. His expression didn't change.
No pity. No horror.
Just understanding. And when I finished, he reached across the table, took my hand and said, You're still here. That says everything. Love didn't bloom like fireworks. It grew like moss, quiet, persistent, soft to the touch. He brought me daffodils on a rainy day. Taught me how to fix a jam drawer. Held my hand through my first funeral since Mom's. When I had my first nightmare in months and woke up sobbing, he didn't ask what it was about. He just held me. Let me cry. Waited until I could breathe again. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch watching the sky change color, he said, "I never thought I'd love again." I turned to him. "Me neither. But I think I do," he added, almost shyly. "I think I do too," I whispered. And there it was. No grand gestures.
No declarations.
Just two broken people choosing to be whole together. With Joseph, I learned that love doesn't have to be loud to be strong. Doesn't need to fix you. Just needs to stay. He proposed the following year. Under the oak tree in the square, with a ring made from his late wife's wedding band, melted down and reshaped. "I thought this love had one life," he said. "But I think maybe love can be reborn. If we let it." And I said yes. With tears. With gratitude. With hope I never thought I'd feel again. Because love, real love, doesn't ask if you're clean or perfect or healed. It just asks, are you ready to be seen? And for the first time in my life, I was. There's something sacred about reaching this age. Not because my knees ache when I climb stairs. Not because I finally like black coffee without sugar. But because when you've lived long enough and loved deeply enough, you begin to understand what stories are really for. They're not just memories. They're maps. They're flashlights. They're soft hands reaching through the darkness saying, "You're not alone." I wasn't always ready to tell mine. For decades, I carried my past like a locked trunk. Too heavy to drag, too dangerous to open. But time is a patient teacher. It reminds you that secrets don't disappear just because you stay quiet. They just grow teeth in the dark. It wasn't until I held my granddaughter in my arms, her eyes blinking up at me, curious and new, that I realized. She deserves to know the woman I used to be. Not just the smiling grandmother with cinnamon cookies and soft hugs, but the girl who was hurt and healed. The woman who crawled out of despair and built something better. Because if we don't tell the truth, our silence becomes another prison for someone else. When Lucy, my daughter, asked me why I started recording my story for Grandparents' Tales, I didn't have the perfect answer at first. Was it for therapy? For legacy? For some kind of closure? Maybe it was all those things. But mostly I did it because I wish someone had told me their story when I was 15. I wish someone had whispered, "This pain won't last forever." That I wasn't ruined. That love could still find me. That I could be more than what was done to me. When I started speaking into that little microphone, sitting here in my kitchen with the kettle humming behind me and my dog snoring at my feet, I was nervous. Would anyone care? Would my voice sound too tired, too broken, too old? But as the words flowed, something else did too. Grace. Grace for the little girl I used to be. For the mistakes I made trying to cope. For the woman who drank just to sleep. For the mother who tried her best even when she was falling apart inside. And then the messages came. From women in Texas who said, "Your story is mine too." From grandsons in Michigan who never knew what their grandmother survived. From strangers who whispered, "Thank you for surviving long enough to tell it." Each comment was a thread, binding us together, stitch by careful stitch, across time and pain and healing. That's the thing no one tells you. When you survive something terrible, you don't just escape. You inherit a duty. A duty to light the path behind you for the next person who's lost in the dark. Doesn't mean you have to be perfect. Doesn't mean you have to have all the answers. You just have to be honest. Now at 68, with my silver hair and slow hands, I don't fear the past like I once did. I've learned to hold it like a fragile photo. Not to erase it, but to frame it. To say, yes, this happened. Yes, it hurt. And yes, I kept going. To anyone listening right now, young or old, if your story feels too heavy to carry, let me say this. You don't have to carry it alone. There are people who will walk with you if you let them. People like my Uncle Augustus. People like Miss Celia and Mary Helen and Mr. Manuel. People who believe you. People who stay. And one day, when your scars have faded into something less sharp, when the nightmares visit less often, you'll have a choice. To lock your story away. Or to open it up and say, "This is how I survived." I hope you choose to tell it, because someone out there needs to hear it. As for me, I sit on this porch now, with my Joseph beside me and the sound of our granddaughter playing inside. And I feel peace, not because life was easy, but because I turned my pain into purpose. Because I lived long enough not just to survive, but to matter. Thank you for listening. for holding space with me, for crying and remembering and healing together. If this story touched your heart, tell someone you trust. Tell your daughter. Tell your grandmother. Tell yourself. Because stories like hearts grow stronger when shared. And this old heart? It's never been stronger.